second day of the two-day International Relations Conference. As most of you all may know, yesterday the conference was inaugurated by Honorable Shri Hamid Ansari ji, Vice President of India, Honorable Shri Vidyasagar Rao, Governor of India, and Honorable Shri Girish Bapat, Guardian Minister for Pune, were the guests of honor. The track for today focuses on India's relations with Iran and Iraq. The chairperson for today's track is Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan. Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan is the Vice Chairman and Executive Head of Kerala State Higher Education Council with the rank of Vice Chancellor. Having served in the Indian Foreign Service for 37 years, Sir was a former permanent representative of India to United Nations and Governor for India of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Sir was a member of the National Security Advisory Board of the Government of India from 2009 to 2012. Currently, he is a Director General, Kerala International Centre, and an advisor to AsiaNet. Sir, may I request you to kindly take over.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that generous introduction. Distinguished guests, ambassadors, and friends. May I say first how grateful I am to be invited to this conference and particularly this opportunity to moderate this morning's session. As you perhaps know, I am a substitute chairman in the absence of Ambassador Prakash Shah, my friend and former boss, who was supposed to chair this session. But unlike him, I have very little experience of bilateral relations of India with either Iran or Iraq. My knowledge of these two countries are confined to the interactions that I had in the multilateral fora, whether it was in New York, Nairobi, or Vienna. If I may drop some names, the present Foreign Minister, Javed Zarif, was my counterpart in New York. And in Vienna, I sat next to the Iranian ambassador, Ambassador Salehi, for 4 years on the board of governors of the IAEA. So I can claim that I have some insights into Iran's international profile, but not as much about bilateral relations, which are the subject of our discussion today. But it may be a blessing in disguise, because I won't have any strong views to impose on the panel, and the panel will be free to bring out any of the points that they would like to make. As far as Iraq is concerned, I have also known several Iraqi diplomats. Ambassador Sahavi, I don't know where he is now, was a good friend. And I also dealt with Iraq during the very difficult days of 91 and 92, when we were on the Security Council at that time. So as I said, those are not relevant in today's discussion, and we'll go straight into bilateral relations. Yesterday, the Vice President very cryptically described the relevance of India's relations with Iraq and Iran. Since it is very brief, I thought I would read it out for your recollection. On Iraq, he said, Iraq remains an important source of crude oil and has the potential for wider economic cooperation under normal conditions. So we hope that normal conditions will soon prevail. And on Iran, he said, the Indian interest in a multi-dimensional strategic and economic relationship with Iran, highlighted after President Khatami's visit in 2003, remained subdued until very recently on account of third country considerations. The current impetus to rejuvenate these is promising. So I do not need to say anything more on the relevance of this discussion for India. But it's interesting that Symbiosis University chose to have a separate session on Iran and Iraq. And this is very appropriate because we generally tend to discuss the Gulf only as far as the GCC countries are concerned. So this particular discussion in the context of the Gulf in general is of particular importance to this conference. If I may come to the very distinguished panelists that we have this morning. Our first speaker will be Ambassador Ansari of Iran. You do not need to describe the accomplishments of an ambassador to India because I'm sure Iran would send their best to India. So would other countries. But the only thing I would like to mention is that he was also ambassador to Russia and UK. So which means he is one of the awesome diplomats from the many that we have around us. So may I request Ambassador Ansari to make your presentation, maybe about 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. I was told this morning that the number of dead pilgrims from India went to 101, and the missings are more than 30. The Iranian pilgrims in Mecca, dead went to 465, and the missing more than 50. Just to pay a tribute and respect to these people, Indian, Iranian, and other pilgrims, I want to ask our dear audience, distinguished audience, to stand up and having 1 minute silence. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the members of Symbiosis Institute of International Studies for providing me this opportunity to be among you at this conference and to present some views on certain issues. Let me also express my special gratitude to Dr. Vidya Yerabedeka, Principal Director of Symbiosis Institute, and Director Gianna Gupta, Vice Chancellor of Symbiosis International University, for inviting me to this conference. And very special thanks to Dr. Mujumdar, who not only supported this conference, but also he used to be a great supporter of Iranian students in Pune for a long time. Ladies and gentlemen, the ties between Iran and India during their long and shared history have created enormous points of strength for both countries. There are many commonalities between our two countries, whether it be in agriculture, architecture, art, and language. What I would like to do today is to highlight some of the areas in which India and Iran have common values or shared interests, and where India and Iran may potentially broaden their ties. In doing so, I will highlight the fields which are ripe for further cooperations. Broadly speaking, greater cooperation may be in fields of culture, policy, trade, and investment. One potential field for expansion of relation and increasing cooperation in the cultural sector, it may be interesting to note that even today, religious commentators produced in India, even decades ago, continued to be source of reference for Iranian religious scholars and clerics. There is great potential for cooperation in the field of literature, film, music, handicrafts, and cultural, and especially in exchange of views at the level of the universities. In the field of politics, and in recent years, India and Iran strive to bring their views closer to each other on different regional issues by broadening their constructive regional cooperation and contacts. In this regard, their membership in non-aligned movement has provided a good opportunity for cooperation. Iran and India are involved in several regional organizations where in some cases Iran holds an observer state status. For example, this is the case in regards to South Asia Association for Regional Cooperation, SAARC. Iran currently enjoys observer status in the SAARC and seeks to become a full member in future. Membership in SAARC would provide an opportunity for Iran to have more political and economic cooperation with other member countries. The biggest need of SAARC countries is to have access to energy sources, and Iran, by enjoying enormous oil and gas reservoirs, can meet this need. Iran's entrance and involvement in this association will greatly facilitate development in the transportation and communication sector, benefiting the SAARC member states. A similar observation may be made with respect to Iran's role and involvement in Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where India is also going to be a member, a full member. Iran and India are also members of Indian Ocean Rim Association, which is an international organization consisting of coastal countries bordering the Indian Ocean. Iran would like to expand its relationship with India within the framework of this organization as well. Recent regional developments, particularly in Afghanistan, have brought the two countries very close to each other. This is particularly relevant in their cooperation and mutual struggle against Taliban, an effort which is ever growing. In view of its links with countries of the Middle East and the Persian Gulf region, these days everybody were talking about the Gulf, and I'm very happy that Mr. Ansari gave some clarification that they are talking about Persian Gulf as well. India's role in this region is expanding, and therefore Iran and India can have more exchange of views. Likewise, many new potential fields of cooperation may exist in Central Asia, Persian Gulf, as well as Pacific region. In light of their commonalities, strengths, and relative stability, Iran and India can cooperate with each other in combating terrorism and extremism. Regarding the growing threat of ISIS in the region, the views of Iran and India are close to each other. Both countries considered the growth of religious intolerance to be dangerous for the region. In the economic sector, the relation between Iran and India experienced growth both before and after the sanctions. Before the lifting of sanctions, most of the relations between the two countries were concentrated on oil. We were selling our oils to India and receiving the money in European banks. India was considered to be one of the leading buyers of Iranian oil. This cooperation grew even during the period of sanctions. It may even be said that the sanctions created a new environment of cooperation between them. During the period of sanction, Iran accumulated financial resources in the country, which itself sparked an increase in economic and trade cooperation. Traders and businessmen from both countries became more familiar with relevant business climate, and both countries witnessed an increase in business-related visitors. There is great potential for cooperation and development of economic ties, particularly in the four main fields: trade, energy, infrastructure, as well as mines and metals. In the field of trade, and in view of the existing capacities and oil income of Iran accumulated in India, as well as proposals of India to give a credit line to Iran, there are extensive possibilities of trade between the two countries and to increase export for India to Iran, from India to Iran. Talks regarding basic agreements for facilitation of trade and investment, like avoidance of double taxation, as well as protection of mutual investment, are going on, which can provide ample support and encouragement to the traders and businessmen as well as investors of the two countries. And in the near future, the PTA is one of the important subjects which will be discussed between two countries, preferential trade agreement. Energy is second area, which includes the onshore and offshore projects, as well as upstream and downstream industries, and where there is an extensive scope of business and investment. And now that we edge closer towards the removal of sanctions, the grounds for cooperation will increase. The same may be observed with respect to investment in the upstream sector and investment by India in the Farzad B gas field, which is a very huge gas field, the talks about which are ongoing. We hope that India will be able to get this project. Likewise, in the downstream sector, in the field of investment in Indian refineries and investment of India in the LNG sector and fertilizer, and also in production of petrochemical products in Iran, there is a suitable environment, and in all these cases, talks are ongoing. Another important sector for cooperation between the two countries is the infrastructure and connectivity, which includes participation and investment in ports, roads, railways, and airports construction. For many reasons, the connectivity sector is the meeting point of long-term economic interest of two countries. More than $8 billion projects had been offered to the Indians in the field of connectivity. In mines and metals sector as well, there are many possibilities of cooperation, and Iran is looking for attracting participation and cooperation of capable countries in this sector, particularly India. In addition to all which has been mentioned above, the geopolitical situation of the two countries is a very important element for the strengthening of ties between them. The distance between the Chabahar port in the southeast of Iran and the moon report is about 930 kilometers. In addition to potential grounds for cooperation between Iran and India, the development and expansion of economic cooperation between the two countries is faced with several impediments, which I do not want to go through impediments, so let me concentrate on positive things. One of the impediments are the third party, which Mr. Ansari mentioned. Third party always used to be a big impediment in the relation between Iran and India. The policies of Iran after nuclear deal and the removal of sanctions will be concentrated towards the expansion of cooperation with the countries of the region. Mr. Rouhani's government is very serious to establish a much better relation with the countries in the region. We consider our neighbors, our countries in the region as our best assets. Before the sanctions, Iran's economic relation was concentrated on Europeans. But during the sanctions, it was a blessing in disguise that we found our best assets for economic cooperations are our neighboring countries and regional countries, which were a great help during the hard sanctions, which was told maybe the most difficult sanctions during the history. Now, after the removal of the sanctions and the political determination of President of Iran and the Prime Minister of India, as well as at the ministerial level of the respective countries, we hope that we will witness an expansion and betterment of relation between our two countries more than before in all sectors of culture, economy, and politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Ansari. As he rightly mentioned, the sky is the limit for India-Iranian cooperation, based as it is on civilizational relations. He mentioned the removal of sanctions. We are all aware of the opportunities that it brings to all of us. And I should congratulate Iran on the nuclear deal which was accomplished. Considering the position of Iran and the United States and others in the Atomic Energy Agency in the years that I was there, it is really a major development. And both sides, of course, claim victory, and they deserve that because both had to make concessions and both had to gain from it. And so it's a win-win situation, and all of us will be beneficiaries of that. Thank you very much. Well, now we turn to another distinguished ambassador, Ambassador Ahmad Berwari of Iraq. As I said earlier, you do not need any more distinction than being ambassador to India. But he has other distinctions. He has not only a Master of Philosophy, but also a PhD from the University of Germany. He has served in Berlin as the representative of the Kurdistan regional government, and he was also a member of the Committee of Foreign Relations of the PUK in Europe. He has been in India for some time, and if I heard right, he's soon leaving, which would be rather unfortunate. But we are glad that he is here, and may I now request him to speak for 15 minutes. Thank you.
Excellency, Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, respected faculty members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the Symbiosis International University for the kind invitation and for giving me the opportunity to speak about the relation between Iraq and India. And I would like to mention that my speech today could be the last public speech as Iraq ambassador to India after completing my tenure as ambassador in this great, beautiful, and important country after 5 years. And Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, if you give me the permission to speak free and to give you after that the text of my speech. It is easier for me as a former politician. Ladies and gentlemen, to speak about the relation between Iraq and India, it means to speak about the links between two civilizations. Today, researchers in Iraq and in the world discovered there is elements in our culture in Iraq and also in ancient religions, Iraqi ancient religions before Islam, which is similar with elements in India and in Hinduism also, just to mention the Yazidis in Iraq. But to start with the new history of the relation and not going back to the relation between two civilizations, as I mentioned, goes back to centuries. Iraq was one of the first Arab countries which recognized India after the independence. And we started officially the diplomatic relations between our two countries in 1952 with ambassador level. In 1953, we signed a trade agreement. 1954, a cultural agreement. In 1955, an agreement of cooperation in civil aviation. These agreements were the start of the relation with India, our relation with India, in different sectors. Iraq goes through very difficult times, 2 or 3 Gulf wars, sanctions, international sanctions. And therefore, for us, it was not very easy, especially after 1991, to continue because of the sanctions and isolations, and because of the wrong policy of the former regime in Iraq, to continue the good relation with our neighboring countries and with our friendly country, including India. After 2003, after the occupation in Iraq and the difficulties, it was also not very easy for us. But with the time, it was possible for us, especially after 2003, after the big change in my country. And just to mention, I am the first Iraqi ambassador to India after 2003. One of my priority here to refresh the historical, long-standing, and very friendly relation between our two countries. The year in 2013, it was a golden year for the relation between our countries. Our former Prime Minister, Mr. Maliki, visited India in 2013, and it was for our relations, it was a historical visit because it was the first ever Prime Minister visiting Iraq. We have signed MOUs, and I just want to mention 2 MOUs which was very important for the relation between our countries. One of them it is a political MOU about the foreign office consultations. And the next meeting, it will be December this year. And the other MOU was in cooperation in energy sector. I don't want to go beside the relation in culture. I want just to go directly to the economic relation between our two countries. Iraq is today the second biggest exporter of crude oil to India after Saudi Arabia. And India is the second biggest partner Iraq's in oil field after China. In the financial year, Indian financial year 2012, 2013, and 2014, the volume of the exchange or export of crude oil to India, the worth of this trade was about 20 billion US dollars. And in 2014 to 2015, it was 15 billion US dollars. It was less not because we have exported less oil, but because the oil prices was dropped, and therefore, in the contrary, our export is still about 350 to 400,000 barrels per day. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend the first day of the conference, but I just want to underline the remark of the Honorable Vice President Iraq about the relation between Iraq and India in the energy sector. We know that India as a developed economy and dependent on energy sources in the next maybe 20 to 50 years could take advantage of the situation in the oil field in Iraq. According to some OPEC records, Iraq has about 143 billion barrel oil reserves. It means we have the resources, but we don't have the infrastructure to produce more and to export more to friendly countries. In the future, Iraq, it will be one of the countries in the Middle East which could produce 6 to 8 million daily, more than what we produce now. It is about 3.5, and we export about 3 million. It means for India the possibility to get, let me to say very open, to get more oil in 20 or 30 years, crude oil. Iraq will be one of the biggest partners for India. And therefore, this relation is vital for us in Iraq, and I think for India also. I just want to go shortly about the people-to-people relations with numbers to make it very short and not boring. We have about 7,000 Iraqi students here in India with their families, maybe 15 to 16,000 Iraqis. And these students and their families are the majority of our community, Iraqi community in India. There is about, let me say last year, in 2014, there were about 18,000 Iraqis came to India for medical treatments. And according to our estimation this year, it could be more than, till maybe it reached 20,000. And hundreds of Iraqis coming to India to attend professional trainings and other possibilities to develop our human resources. We are thanking, of course, India for providing us in these difficult times. There is about 40 to 50,000 Indians going yearly to Iraq for pilgrim, for Najaf and Karbala, and also for Baghdad to visit the shrine of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Gailani. These few figures and numbers, despite the relation between the two countries. Last year, when ISIS attacked Iraq and occupied Mosul and Tikrit and some areas in the west part of Iraq. Unfortunately, it was also a challenge for the new formed Indian government. It was 1.5, 2 months after forming the new government here in India, was forced to deal with the challenging situation with Indian citizens living in Iraq and working in Iraq. There were about, I think everybody knows, 46 nurses in Tikrit were hostage. And fortunately, the Indian government, with cooperation with our government, could free these innocent sisters. Until now, there is but exactly 39 Indian workers, from our point of view, are missed and not hostages, because ISIS didn't give any announcement about their capturing, and there is also difficulties to find ways to get from first sources information about these 39 Indian workers in Mosul. We have information that they are still alive, and that is very positive, but we are very worried, and I mean with we, the Indian government and the Iraqi government, because we don't know exactly what these people are doing now, and what is the main purpose of ISIS to capture these people. In 2014, after attacks of ISIS, the Indian government evacuated about 7,000 Indians living in Iraq. We understand, and at that time understood also the efforts and supported also the efforts of the Indian government to evacuate the Indian workers from Iraq because of the crisis. But in the same time, the majority of these Indian workers, which has been evacuated to India back, they were in areas in Iraq, as example, in the Kurdish region in Iraq, in Basra, in Najaf and Karbala, and these regions were not affected. And the majority of these 7,000, they went back to Iraq and now working in Iraq. I just wanted to say, of course, to carry the responsibility for the life of their own citizens, governments has to do something. But at the same time, when India evacuated 7,000 its workers and citizens from Iraq, it was also a new situation for us. And of course, when other countries saw that India evacuating its people, started to evacuate its people also. And as I mentioned, the majority of these people were in areas in Iraq which were not affected at all. And this evacuation impacted also the fulfillment of contracts of companies, investments. Just for your information, the majority of Indians working in Iraq, they are working with non-Indian companies, and especially with companies working in the oil field. I have to finish my speech, unfortunately, but I just want to end my speech with the remark that we in Iraq, we recognize us as a mini India, a diversity, an ethnic and religion diversity, which could be a mini India. But at the same time, India is a very positive and good example for us, Iraq, how India can manage the huge diversity and take advantage in the same time from, let me say, universal values like democracy or federalism. And everybody knows that there is, in some groups in our region, reservations about or against democracy, against feudalism, and against these other things, because they think that they are Western values. But for us, India as a non-Western country, and at the same time a democratic federal country, as I mentioned, it is a very good example for us. We in Iraq, looking how India can manage to conduct these values in the political life, and at the same time, the expectation from our side, also it is bigger than what India could, or what India did in the past. We think that it will be in our interest and the interest of our bilateral relation if India could be more engaged in our region, and especially in Iraq. But it could be a matter of capacity. And I think if India would like to be a member of the Security Council members, and it is a big and important country, these efforts India needs also responsibility. And therefore, we welcome India to come to our region and to be a player and a mediator, and to transfer the values which India make it India to our region. Thank you very much, and I am sorry that I violated the protocol and spoken free. Thank you very much.
No problem, Mr. Ambassador. I thank the Distinguished Ambassador of Iraq for his presentation. Of course, the story of Iraq from 1990 till today has been a very complex picture, fairly cloudy, but there are silver linings, as he pointed out. The export to India was $20 billion last year, and this year it is about $15 billion, in spite of all the problems. There are Iraqi students in India. Many Iraqis come to India for medical treatment, and Indians go to Iraq for pilgrimage. And I know full well the story of the Indian nurses in Iraq, because I live in Kerala, from where all these ladies went. And there was great appreciation, particularly in Kerala, for the way in which this whole situation was handled by our Iraqi friends. And I particularly would like to invite your attention to his last point, that Iraq would like India to play an important role in the region. And also he hinted at the possibility of India being on the Security Council. Thank you very much. Well, I have a great advantage in dealing with the next three speakers, because all of them are my good friends. I almost said Ambassador Saeed Naqvi by habit, but he is no less of an ambassador of India than any one of us. He can be described in many ways: senior Indian journalist, television commentator, interviewer, and whatnot. But I know him as the globetrotter who came to every one of my postings in one capacity or the other, including Fiji. Can you believe somebody traveling all the way to Fiji to interview Colonel Sithiveni Ramuka? He did even that, not to speak about the other very distinguished international leaders that he has interviewed. Of course, he is a household name in India in his various capacities, and a great pleasure to invite my friend Saeed Naqvi to make his presentation.
I am grateful, indeed flattered, that Symbiosis has thought of me as one of the speakers in this wonderful city of Pune, which I associate with, for reasons I shall explain very briefly, with Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Now, why should that be so? A remarkable man called Hasrat Mohani in the Awadh area, great poet, among the top, member of the Constituent Assembly, among the leaders of the national movement, founder member of the Communist Party of India, did not sign the constitution because he said it was anti-people, was a great fan and a great admirer during the freedom movement of Tilak's. I don't know how many people in this area wrote poetry remembering Bal Gangadhar Tilak, but Maulana Hasrat Mohani did. He wrote poems about him. And when he died in 1924, 25, I should remember the date, he said, I can see him in paradise with the Houris. Now, I do not know whether Tilak himself would have enjoyed that projection of himself in paradise. But that's it. I mean, how remarkable that in the area of Awadh, where this very remarkable man was, poetry on Tilak. Anyway, so that I am squeezed between ambassadors there. You have the perspective of the Iranian ambassador to India. You have the perspective of the Iraqi ambassador. You will now have the perspective of our ambassador in Iraq, former, and then Ambassador Srivastava, who was in Iran. So they are specialists. I am something of a footloose, fancy-free journalist. I have traveled. So any place that appears in my narrative, I was there. So that has been my library. And I'm delighted that you have chosen to hold this conference centered on West Asia, Iran, and India at a time, and we better be warned, at a time when the world to which all of us are attached, the whole world order, is in a serious cusp of change. What has happened? So I will give you something of an overview. What has happened in the recent past in Syria is a rout on a scale that we have not begun to realize, and we will when the message comes. We do not know because we don't have the media to amplify that which is happening there. We only have one version of things. What has happened in Syria is akin to a rout. Now, what am I saying? What I'm saying is, the Americans, Saudis, Turks, Qataris, openly having and financing proxies in Syria. Now, this was sold to us as a great opposition uprising, suddenly out of nowhere, against Bashar al-Assad. On the 12th of May this year, John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, made a declaration, 12th of May, that our interests and the way forward on Syria converge. Now, when big powers make statements like those, there is enough room for maneuver left so that one power can give its spin to its audience back home and the other to its own constituency. The slight difference in approach was the Russians maintained that Bashar al-Assad, the president, is part of the solution. He has to be part of the solution. The Americans said he has to go, but not now. We shall string him along towards a solution, and then we shall decide at some point when he will be dispensed with. Now, as you know, this is diplomatic mumbo-jumbo. What had happened was this. The most enthusiastic in this whole Syrian expedition have been the Saudis. The Saudi foreign minister, Jubair, flew to Moscow, met Putin and Lavrov, and everyone thought that soon there will be a declaration towards some kind of a settlement on Syria. He said, I agree on everything. Well, there he didn't say anything, but the news that was leaked later, that everything but Assad must go. You must give me victory in Yemen, and you must give me Assad's head on a platter in. This remains and remained the Saudi public position. Why this insistence? Because inside they have accepted, for instance, the Syrian army will remain there. In other words, the Alawite army will run the affairs of state inside Syria. All the institutions will remain. Saudi, there's a tacit agreement. But we want Assad out. Why? Because if we say we've dropped Assad as a target, then all the Jamaat al-Nusra and various groups and extremist groups that we have financed and who are our assets in this country and outside this country, they will drop us. So this has to be done very carefully. Meanwhile, the Russians said, you know, the shikar these days is taboo, but in my area where I am, once upon a time, there was some shikar. A shikari invited a friend for a hunting party, a shoot, because he had obtained permission from the local authorities to cull vermin. Now, if you don't cull vermin like wild boar or certain kinds of antelope, they destroy our crop and our field in that area. I don't know what the picture here is. So you get permission. So the guest turned up for this shoot. He went out and he came back with a bag full of wild boar, which is pig. Oh, there was a hullabaloo. How can you bring wild boar? You know that we don't eat pork. When you had gone to... So exactly this is happening. We've come here to fight terrorism, said the Russians. They said, no, but you are here so that together we can fight ISIS. I said, but ISIS is not the only terror group. So when they started targeting, having reached there in Syria, when the Russians started targeting other militant groups who are tributaries to Daesh and the ISIS, there is hullabaloo. And what has happened? All the assets trained by the Americans on behalf of the other trio, like the Saudis and the Qataris, and they have left their weapons with ISIS and left and asked for safe passage. The result is that Ashton Carter, please listen to this, the Defense Secretary is twice, thrice making statements, look, our entire training process was wrong. We were training, now they're admitting, what is the admission? That we were inside Syria training various people so that they could oust the Assad regime. Well, and now we find, so it was $1 billion project in 2 tranches of 500 million each. One, they have announced that we are withdrawing because it has turned out to be a bummer. There's a rout. So they don't know which way to. Meanwhile, the Russians are having a field day on this hunt. So other than this vermin, they're killing the other vermin. And this is the state. What we are witnessing, that is why I'm saying you've called your conference at a very right time. We are at a cusp of a much bigger change. It is not Yemen and Syria and it is actually the whole architecture of West Asia and Middle East, of which 2 columns are ready. Which ones are ready? The Tehran, Washington, and the 5+1 are ready because the nuclear deal is more or less through. So we are, and in this, unfortunately, I don't think we have an ambassador yet in Syria. Do we have one in Iraq? I don't know. They may be. We have been led. I will just conclude with this. I had a great deal to say about our relations with Iraq and with Syria and with Iran, but then there's no time, apparently. Maybe in the question and answer session, I'll try and make up if there is a question on that. So this is the picture. We don't have, during the Gulf War, let me tell you a story, and I'll end on that. Mr. Dayakara was the ambassador. I met him there. As he says, I was everywhere, wherever my ambassadors were. Dalmiz is sitting here, even Ranjit Gupta is here. Wherever they were, I have been. Ranjit Gupta has forgotten, but I was in Bangkok when he was there. And so on. Tyagi was the ambassador, wasn't he? He used to sleep in his bed with 2 Kalashnikov rifles like this. So there he was in bed with, I saw the ambassador of India. And when it was announced that Baghdad has fallen, everyone said very soon, Baghdad has fallen. Everyone shifted to Amman. This is our analysis. Why was this our analysis? Because this was the American analysis. We are taking completely dictation speed from them. What were they saying? They were saying within a few days Saddam Hussein will be gone. And we will go and give our credentials to the new American authority in Baghdad. So my ambassador Tyagi went to Amman in Jordan. He took up a hotel room. The poor chap nearly had a nerve. Every day, morning, evening, afternoon, he's monitoring the television. When will Saddam fall? When will Saddam fall? Then I will go there and I will present my credentials. No, he was not the only one. Liz Doucette of the BBC was sitting on the terrace of Hilton Hotel in Amman, also with instructions. So they didn't know what was going on. That wait, soon there will be another government in Baghdad. You will turn up there, you will have all the scoops, because Saddam Hussein will have gone. American authority, Paul Bremer is a wonderful man. And we will go and Tyagi will present his credentials and we'll have all the scoops. It took them, ladies and gentlemen, 10 years. And when they left, it was in a state of such disrepair that I don't have the time to see you because I was there. I was there when, if 1 minute, can I just, another little yarn? The Americans invaded Baghdad on April 3rd. April 3, 2001. 2003, sorry. Now, as I told you, soon Saddam Hussein is going to go. Victory has to be announced. The neocons are impatient in Washington, D.C. What do? Because there's nothing happening. So, all of you have seen a statue of Saddam Hussein being pulled down in Baghdad by the so-called people. Now, I was in Palestine Hotel. What had happened was people were not materializing. There were no people to celebrate, and that statue was so damn strong they couldn't pull it down. So the American Marines put their own lasso around, and it was with their Humvees, it was pulled down, and it was celebrated as a great popular Tali, 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 Saddam Hussein has fallen. Our friend, the wonderful Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, God bless him, he saw this. He says, my God, an awesome power has arisen, and there was an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation, if you remember, after the attack on our parliament on the 13th of December. And we were virtually, Pakistan and India were like this. He went to Kashmir on the 18th. He made a declaration that this is no time. An awesome power has arisen, he said. And this is no time to sustain old quarrels. That eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation was given up. He said, here's my hand of friendship. In Srinagar, he made that statement, which led to the agreement of January 4th, 2004, wasn't it? 2004. At which point, I must shut up because the lady in the wings will send me another chitti. I will... that I just gave you a view, an overview of things, and that will, if you keep that at the back of your mind, you will have an understanding of that which is unfolding, and it is going to unfold in a big way. it will take a time to reach you because your media is not there. So you will watch BBC and CNN and they will give you one version, and then another version, a corrected version will come later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saeed. We would have given you more time, but even if you gave you the whole day, you wouldn't have finished your stories. And look at the style. It is very different than the style of ambassadors. Now you know that we know that you are not an ambassador. But thank you very much for that very picturesque and lively description of some aspects of the developments in West Asia. Well, may I now turn to a true expert on Iraq, Ambassador Dayakara. He has served several times in Iraq, and also he has served in other countries of the region. I have not worked with him, but I have followed him to some places like Washington, where the stories of his adventures and heroism remained even after several years after his departure. So I know some of the work that he has done there, and also he is recognized today as one of our foremost experts on Iraq. I'm glad he's here. Unfortunately, he is not feeling too well, so he'll speak from the desk with your permission. Ambassador Dayakara.
Chair of the session, Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan, fellow panelists, Your Excellencies. I would like to begin by thanking founder and Chancellor of Symbiosis University, Dr. S.B. Majumdar, Vice Chancellor Dr. Rajani Gupte, and Principal Director Dr. Vidya Erwadekar, and Ambassador Shri Sudhir Devare for this opportunity to participate in this IR conference. I would also like to thank Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan for the very gracious introduction. The theme for my presentation is India's relations with Iraq in the post-2003 paradigm, prospects and challenges. My presentation has three parts. Firstly, a quick review of the historical relations between India and Iraq, followed by a brief account of the features of the post-2003 paradigm in Iraq, and lastly, India's relations with the new Iraq and future prospects and challenges. Iraq is characterized by its civilizational strength, quality of human resource, hydrocarbon reserves, perennial water resources, and being a spiritual fountainhead for all the three major religions of the Middle East. India's relations with Iraq date back to the dawn of civilization, continuing in one form or the other in virtually every phase of history. I just give a few snapshots of these relations. The contacts between Mesopotamian and Indus Valley civilizations, the visits of the priests from the Chaldean churches in and around Mosul to the Malabar coast for liturgy beginning from the 13th century, with some of them being buried in Thrissur. The invasion of Sindh by Muhammad bin Qasim, a nephew and son-in-law of the governor of Baghdad in 712 AD. Extensive contacts between Indian and Arab scholars in the Abbasid period in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, metallurgy, literature, philosophy, numerals, philosophy, and so on. Khalil our Dimna, an Arabic translation of Panchatantra, is a primer for Arab children. Influence of Sufi saints like Abdul Qadir Gailani, Hasan al-Basri, Junaid Baghdadi, al-Behlul, they have millions of followers in India. East India Company opened an office in Baghdad in 1791. British Office of the Indian Civil Service manned important positions in Iraq. Indian soldiers fought in Iraq in the two world wars. Their graves can be seen. Those who fell there, their graves can be seen in various parts of Iraq. The 2003 invasion of Iraq by the US-led coalition forces brought about tectonic changes in Iraq, resetting radically the political, social, ethnic, and sectarian order, and drastically altering its domestic and foreign policy orientation, with accompanying changes in the geopolitical and strategic situation and balance of power in the region. The new paradigm was an antithesis of what was nurtured in Iraq for centuries. Main features of the new Iraqi paradigm or pluralism with multi-party parliamentary democracy that reflects the demographic weight of different sectarian and ethnic groups, a federalism, political parties constitute along sectarian and ethnic affiliation, presence of private militias, a power-sharing arrangement along ethnic and sectarian lines, and an autonomous Kurdistan in the north with a constitution, a president, a prime minister, and a parliament of its own, but all within the sovereignty of Iraq. Coalition governments have become a norm in Iraq rather than exception. While the executive power rested in Baghdad, one has to reckon with the overarching spiritual and moral authority exercised from Najaf by Ayatollah Ali Sistani, who personifies unchallenged spiritual authority and commands enormous respect. Arab Spring, which wrought havoc elsewhere, had no resonance in Iraq. The sudden changes in the century-old equilibrium in Iraq created multiple challenges on multiple fronts to the people and the state. Disbanding of the Ba'athist army left many armed people join private militias or the Sunni insurgents or the plain terrorist outfits like Al-Qaeda or the precursor organization of Islamic State. Benign doctrinal divergence in existence for centuries in Iraq was transformed into vicious political rivalries. Millions of people were displaced by sectarian strife internally and forced to seek shelter abroad. Corruption became widespread. Billions of dollars spent on infrastructure made no difference. High unemployment also made youth to drift militant bodies. India's response to post-2000 changes. The Indian Parliament passed a unanimous resolution on 8 April 2003, just a day before the fall of Baghdad, deploring the military action and calling for withdrawal. The annual report of the Ministry of External Affairs for the period 2003 and 4 states the policy, quote, India's policies concerning developments in Iraq are based on its principles and national interest, unquote. Principles and national interests, however, do not always have the same trajectory. The post-2003 scenario posed immediate challenges to Indian foreign policy and diplomacy. After 2003, the new Iraqi government, as a matter of policy, preferred the coalition member countries for awarding reconstruction work for their role in the wars of Saddam Hussein. India, therefore, lost out in the initial reconstruction efforts. As the security situation deteriorated, India was approached by the coalition forces for contribution of troops, which, of course, India declined. The worsened security situation was exemplified by the kidnapping of 3 Indian truck drivers, which led to a travel advisory against travel of Indians to Iraq. India, of course, continued to assist Iraq in capacity building through training programs under the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program and Cultural Exchange Program. Iraq, on its part, made some moves to reactivate the relations with India after it had the first elected government, sent their oil minister for the Joint Commission 2007, followed by several business delegations. There were parliamentary delegations, and Iraq was the first to post an ambassador to Delhi, which the government of India reciprocated immediately. The national security advisor visited, and the prime minister of Iraq visited here. Several MOUs were signed. Oil continues to be the principal economic link between India and Iraq. That both countries chose their oil minister to co-chair the Joint Commission underscore the centrality of US in the bilateral relations. Iraq is now the second largest oil source. Importance of India to Iraq. India is a preferred destination for Iraqis for cost-effective and quality medical treatment, higher education, and tourism. Indian embassy issues 40,000 visas every year in Baghdad. India is an important market for its oil and gas and dependable place for training needs of Iraqi officials, a source of trained manpower for its oil sector. And India is also a market for minerals like phosphate and sulfate and phosphate. And Indian pilgrims visiting in hundreds of thousands help the economy of Iraq. Importance of Iraq to India. Firstly, energy security, of which we have talked 143 billion barrels, which His Excellency the Ambassador mentioned. And then the market for Indian goods is Iraq. And the export this year or last year, 2014, were $1 billion. And it also plays a role in food security by supplying phosphates, which are needed for agriculture. Impediments to increase relations between the two countries. One is the security situation, of which we are all aware. Second is the financial weakness of Iraq because of their commitment for development, security, and now the low oil prices. There are also no direct banking and shipping. And the Iraqi decision-making also sometimes led to disappointment in Indian companies. They canceled a $250 million contract in Basra. Then in Iraqi Kurdistan, an Indian company had to wind up the oil project at the behest of the central government in Baghdad. At the moment, Islamic State has an effective control over a third of the territory. It poses multiple threats to Indian security. The radicals, the Indians in its ranks, could replicate on return the same behavior as IS. IS also published a map, medieval Khorasan, showing India as part of its caliphate. Some 39 workers are still in their custody. Indian government has felt compelled to issue again a travel advisory, which has affected the business travel, manpower effects, thanks to IS presence in Iraq. In response to general call for Ayatollah Sistani in Najaf, thousands of Indian Shias volunteered to go to Iraq, but were denied visas. That shows that polarization could also begin in parts of India between the two sects. There is also the neighbors in Pakistan. IS has some following in Pakistan. And one indication was that when they had a hostage in IS, they asked America to release one lady called Afia Siddiqui, who was given 80 years jail for doing some weapons manufacture, chemical weapons also. The way forward, following steps are suggested to strengthen cooperation with Iraq. Security cooperation in fighting terrorism without sending troops, through exchange of information and coordination of aspects recommended. We also need to have consulates in Erbil and Basra in the north and the south, which are comparatively peaceful areas where considerable economic activity is going on and Indian citizens live. The revival of Parliamentary Friendship Committee, the multi-party parliamentary democracy in India, Iraq provide a new vertical post-2003 for cooperation. The Joint Commission, which is due, last met in Baghdad 2013, is to be convened for taking up further steps. Another area is the revival of the Awadh bequest. There is a strong, long historical relation between the principalities of Awadh, Mahmudabad, and Rampur in India, and Najaf and Karbala. Nawab Awadh had set apart a money to be spent on Najaf Karbala in the 19th century. Of India as a successor state of the British government is following that. That has been interrupted. 20,000 pounds originally in the beginning of 47, that needs to be revived. Now, Iraq owes us a $1 billion debt going from the 1980s. Iraq is in no position to pay. It is best converted as an investment for Indian companies to start manufacturing in Iraq. Then oil exploration in Iraq. ONGC, Oil and Natural Gas Commission, has decades of working in Iraq. It has signed with the government in Iraq in 2000, the previous government, an exploration government, which the new government has recognized, but needs to be pursued for signing a fresh contract. A joint threat, there are gaps in the history between Indian and Iraqi histories because of the Ba'athist government's political correctness. For instance, the Shia rulers' connection with this 18th and 19th century in Iraq needs to be researched. The Awadh have financed a canal from Euphrates to Karbala, turning that desert patch into a green zone, and it's called India Barrage. So a lot of these things are there, and Jawaharlal Nehru University has done some research, but there is an organization called Bayt al-Hikmah, and our ICC, our Indian Council of Cultural Relations, can do something on that. And there also colonial period, quite a lot of research. Tagore had visited, and there were quite a few visitors who had come and written travelogues, including Hebatuddin Shahristani, whose son is the deputy prime minister in Iraq. So a lot of these things, those periods, need to be explored. There are World War I and II graves of Indian soldiers. Thanks to our government revised policy, by now we honor those fallen soldiers of the World War I and II. So I conclude with this statement, but there's a lot of potential between the two countries, and the IS notwithstanding, it will go down and reappear as it thrives. But the economic activities in Iraq would go on as it happened in the Iraq-Iran wartime, later in the UN sanctions, and in the last 10 years. India exports $1 billion thing. So there is opportunities, a lot, and follow-up action need to be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Dayakara. I hope you feel better by the end of the conference. Thank you. Well, we already run out of our time, but the organizers have been gracious enough to extend it by half an hour. So may I invite my distinguished friend, Dinkar Srivastava. When I was in New York, he happened to be in Delhi sending us instructions. And at one point, Ambassador Ansari, who is now the vice president, and myself felt that these instructions were getting very tough from this young man. So we invited him to New York and gave him a nice lunch. And after that, the instructions became softer. This was long before he became an ambassador to Iran, Libya, and Czech Republic. So now he's a very distinguished colleague, and I have great pleasure in inviting him to make his presentation for 15 minutes so that we have a few minutes for question and answers. Ambassador Srivastava.
So you have already exposed me, but let me add, I am always willing to have a free lunch, and next time I'll come to Trivandrum. I want to thank Dr. Mazumdar, Dr. Vidya, and Ambassador Devre for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to be with you. I find it very difficult to speak of India-Iran relations in bilateral terms because coming from Lucknow, Akais from Lucknow, I'm so much part of the common culture that we share. My great-grandfather wrote his will in Farsi, and the Nawabs of Awadh came from Nishapur, a place near, this is the birthplace of Umar Khayyam. But there was another dimension which I was not aware, which the then Foreign Minister, Dr. Salehi, in my first courtesy call on him, told me. Dr. Salehi, as you know, is a nuclear physicist. He's done PhD from MIT, a distinction which perhaps very few Indian foreign ministers can share. He said that root of Farsi is Sanskrit. What he was referring to was the very close commonality between Avesta and Sanskrit languages. And this remained till Middle Farsi or Pahlavi, which was 6th century. With the coming of the Arabs, the script changed. And I have seen it myself. I had an opportunity. I have visited all over the country. In Ayatollah Marshi Library in Qom, I saw a book dating back to 6th century AD. On the same page, there was a paragraph in Pahlavi and the translation in Sanskrit. Now you give translation in a language which is better understood. I once went to Mashhad. I have been to Mashhad many times, and I attended a very interesting seminar by Firdausi Foundation. And this was about the links between India and Iran going back to 10th century. And as the speaker said, there were 4 Kharat Khanas in Mashhad, which was founded by Indian pilgrims. So you have, and of course, we all know that Humayun took refuge in Iran, and I have visited Isfahan, and much of lot of Mughal architecture, especially the concept of the octagonal structure which you see in Humayun's tomb. It is based, I think, on the concept of Hasht Bahisht. And I had an opportunity to see it. And so it comes back to something which one was familiar, one learned the roots, having during this period in my 4 long years in Iran. Urdu alphabet, of course, is entirely based on Farsi. It is Arabic and Farsi, but it is closer to Farsi. It has all 4 extra alphabets which are there. Till 1947, India and Iran shared a common border. The partition created a discontinuity, but it has also created a convergence of interests. We need Iran in terms of transit. India-Iran relations rest on national consensus. Pandit Nehru said that there are hardly any 2 countries in the world who share so much. Mrs. Gandhi visited Iran, Prime Minister Vajpayee visited Iran, and during my term, Dr. Manmohan Singh visited Iran. An invitation has been extended to Prime Minister Modi, which has been accepted in principle. The dates have to be fixed. Iran offers India transit route to Afghanistan, CIS countries, and Russia. And to my mind, this is much more important and more enduring link than the age of hydrocarbon, which might be over in another 50, 60, or maybe 100 years. But the geography you cannot change. I was privileged that the MOU on Indian participation in Chabahar port was signed during my beat by Honorable Minister of Shipping, Srinivasan Gadkari. We still have some work to do. There is a legal contract to be signed, but the main framework is in existence. During my term, also we had 2 trial runs on INSTC. This is International North-South Transit Corridor. This has been under discussion for more than a decade, but it took a practical shape during last 2 years. And this transit corridor can cut short our transit costs to Russia by 30% and time by 40%. And this route can also give us access to CIS countries. And much against the misperceptions here that, there is this is not one route, there are multiple routes going from Bandar Abbas north to Caspian Sea ports of Astara and Amirabad, and there's a land link, through Gorgon, which has been inaugurated 2 years back, which connects the rail road between Kazakhstan, Iran, and Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Iran. And of course, there's a route also which is going up from Bandar Abbas. So in one of these 4 segments, there is a 180 or 160 kilometers gap for the railway sector. But the other the road segment is already working, and Iran is an oil-rich country. Most of the cargo in Iran moves by road, and the costs are comparable. So these links are available. And as I was mentioning, this rail link, which was inaugurated by presidents of Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Iran in December 2014, you have a link which is already in existence, which can take you right up to Kazakhstan. With Russia, there are some enterprising Indian businesses who are already importing goods via the Caspian Sea port. Iran remains and will remain a major provider of India's energy needs. During sanction period, unfortunately, the Indian crude purchase has fallen from 21 million ton to 10.5 million ton. I think this may be a temporary phenomenon and will go up once the sanctions are lifted. But apart from crude purchase, Iran also offers India very attractive opportunities in upstream exploration, Farzad B. And Iran has a unique advantage because of its proximity to India, that the gas, which can be evacuated through subsea pipeline, on which a private sector group called Saeed has been working. Iran is rich in oil and gas, but its greatest resource is the human resource. And I found the people very highly educated. The level of literacy as well as tertiary education is higher than in India. And this phenomenon actually got accelerated after the revolution, provision of the social services and so on. And India has contributed to capacity building. There is a large number of Iranian students in India, including Pune and Symbiosis University. Unfortunately, there are many perceptions about Iran, and I have seen as ambassador for 4 years, and I have traveled very extensively. Iran has world-class infrastructure. The roads and bridges, they are better than India. It has a foreign investment law which provides up to 100% foreign equity participation in many sectors. The chambers of commerce are very, very active, and Tehran chamber led 3 delegations, Iran chamber led 1 delegation, FICCI, CII, FIO, all 3 have taken delegations to Iran. Iranian economy showed its resilience during the sanctions period, and particularly since the inauguration of President Rouhani's government, Iran's economic performance has improved. The inflation rate has come down from 40% to around 14%. There has been positive GDP growth for the first time last year. This is despite the fall in oil prices. And Iran has an excellent credit record, according to Economist Intelligence Unit, which is a neutral publication. Iran's external debt to GDP ratio is 2%, which is absolutely nothing. I think in case of India, it is above 50. In case of many other developed countries, it ranges from 100 to 200%. Iran cannot be seen through this prism of sanctions. Sanctions for 30, 40 years, it's too short a period in the life of a nation. And the government of India took a very wise decision to maintain the full spectrum of our engagement with Iran during the sanctions period. And this was not an easy exercise. Both Iran and India have made enormous sacrifice to maintain this relationship during this difficult period. We virtually had to reinvent everything from banking to insurance to shipping. The two-way trade has remained around US $15 billion. The balance of trade remains in favor of Iran because they are a major, just as in case of other countries from whom we import crude, for instance, Saudi Arabia, which is the largest largest crude, largest amount of Indian crude imports come, or Iraq for that matter. Iran has a population of more than 80 million. Therefore, it represents a very large market, and Indian companies have not fully exploited the potential of this market. Sanctions really deepened after 2010, but even before the sanctions, I have been served with one slip, but some of the speakers had endured 2 slips. So even before the sanctions, major European companies like Peugeot, Volvo, Scania had set up plants in Iran for manufacturing in that country, from cars to trucks. Chinese companies have made a major inroad in Iranian auto sector during the sanctions period. And incidentally, I was talking about misperceptions. There are even US sanctions against auto sector were suspended about a year and a half ago. European oil and gas companies, including Total, Shell, Eni, were present in Iran before the sanctions deepened. And following whatever I've seen in the media, they are all planning a return. Petrochemical sector represents the most promising area for Indian investment. And I think here again we have been behind the curve. Before the sanctions deepened, there were major Western companies amongst international brands. Names, the one Sasol is very well known, South African company which has GTL technology. They have they had invested in an aromatic plant in Iran. And of course, we would like to have competitive gas price over the life of the project for setting up Indian petrochemical, for setting up petrochemicals plants, particularly urea. We are an agricultural country, a poor country, and we need urea at a lower price. Chabahar is not only is a major point for transit. Iran is going to develop the 3rd biggest petrochemical hub in Chabahar after Asaluye and I think Bandar Imam Khomeini. There's also need for Iran to look to increase investment in India. During 70s, some investment came in terms of, Kudremukh iron ore company was set up with Iranian assistance, and there's still Iranian investment in refinery and a small fertilizer plant in Chennai. But more can be done. Iran's international context is evolving, and this will make it easier to do business with Iran. It will also give Iran more choice, which is its legitimate right. And of course, this will mean return of many companies or countries to Iran. This is not true of India because we never left Iran, and we stayed with them through this difficult phase. Iran's reintegration in international mainstream comes at a time when the geopolitical situation in the region is in turmoil, and the threat of ISIL creates space for cooperation amongst countries of the region. And this will also have a cooperation, this regional cooperation will also help stabilize Afghanistan situation. Indo-Iran relations are not directed against any third country, and we have very close historical and relations which have become stronger in the contemporary period with Iran's neighbors across the Gulf. Our focus is on strengthening bilateral relations, and as Vice President mentioned, the peace in the region will serve interest of all countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dinkar. Of course, we all noticed the deep understanding that he has of Iran, and his remarks reflected that deep understanding and sympathy for Iran. Well, friends, we have only 9 minutes to go, and I don't know how many questions we can take. Well, 9 questions would be a bit difficult, but maybe at least 2 or 3. And may I say that the panelists would be quite happy not only to speak of bilateral relations, particularly the ambassador of Iran has indicated to me that he would also like to take questions, would be happy to take questions on the region itself. So we can expand it a little because we have heard already bilateral aspect. So who goes first? Yes?
My question is to Ambassador Ansari. This is regarding the gas projects. The north field of Qatar and the south Pars field, they are contiguous, and there's no, of course, geographical boundaries as such. But both are the largest field in the world, and Qatar during last 10 years has been able to develop 77 million tons of LNG capacity. All credit goes to the former oil minister of Qatar, Al-Attiyah. But Iran, you have been talking for last 15 years, developing 40 million tons capacity at ports in Salwe, Bandar Abbas, and also in Kish Island. But yes, sanctions and availability of technology, the cryogenic technology, had been one of the major issues. Now, sanctions have been lifted. There would be an inflow of capital, maybe from a number of multinationals who are having technology on LNG cryogenic development. What is the roadmap of Iran to develop the huge gas reserves and convert them into LNG for exports to the entire world? You had already had about 40 million tons capacity way back in 2000. So what is the roadmap? Is there any roadmap, or if it has not been made, could it be made, and when could it be made? Thank you.
Iran policy toward gas was mainly based on pipelines. And we were quite successful with pipelines from Turkmenistan to Turkey, from Iran to Iraq. And one of the big projects was our proposal about the peace pipeline, which could go to Pakistan and India. But I'm sure it was near the sanctions, which our policy was changing toward LNG as well. But as you mentioned, because of the sanctions, we were not able to proceed with the LNG technologies. But I think after the sanctions, one of the projects, one of the policies which the definitely government will follow is LNG. And I'm sure maybe it takes 1 or 2 years. One of the big projects will be finished, and Iran will come to the LNG business as well. And definitely gas, according to our reservoirs, is one of the big foreign, we can say, revenues. And we are studying different markets. And I'm sure India in the future can be one of the markets for Iran. But always pipeline is on the table. So we hope one day the Indians come to the negotiating table for pipeline.
Thank you. If you may refrain from asking another question so that another person gets a chance. Who is next? Yes?
Hello, I'm Bishrata Banerjee, pursuing MBA in IB. I wanted to ask, sir, India is inviting a lot of propositions and investments from the world. So how does Iran and Iraq look at this proposition, and what is your view on this?
May I ask Ambassador of Iraq to say, or no? Or Dayakara?
Well, first of all, of course,
Going to Iran, and what is your perspective on investments going to these countries?
yes, first of all, in Iraq, we are welcoming every effort to welcome investors in our country. And we are a very liberal investment law. But as you know, the situation, the security is sometimes a big hurdle for preparing a positive climate for investors. Iraq is a big country, and as I mentioned in my short speech, you cannot see Iraq just in the umbrella what has happened in some parts. As example, in the speech of Ambassador Dayakara, 1/3 of Iraq is occupied by ISIS, but the numbers of people, Iraqis living in this area, is not 1/3 of Iraq, and also maybe 50% of the areas which has been occupied by ISIS close to the Syrian and Jordan borders are deserts. There is nothing. Therefore, opportunities for investment in Iraq, especially in the safe areas, as example, in the south part of Iraq, to mention the city of, or the province of Basra, Najaf and Karbala, and of course in the Kurdish regional area in the north. I don't know if I have succeeded to answer the question.
On Iran and investing in India, Iran used to be interested to invest in India, but during the sanctions, definitely we are facing with some restrictions, and we hope after the sanctions, these restrictions is removed, and Iran is interested to invest, especially in the refineries in this country. And we are inviting Indians to invest in Iran, and we are looking for Indian credit lines for different projects. As I said, we had offered billions of dollars of projects, which definitely India can be one of the end user of those projects, because these projects are mainly in the road, ports, and railroad, which definitely a good network in Iran can be good for the Indian goods to go to Afghanistan, to Central Asia, to Russia, to North Europe, as His Excellency Mr. Ambassador mentioned. And you know, let me be honest with you, Iran since revolution used to be one of the big investor and FDI investors in India, because we used to have our capitals more than $8 billion in the Indian banks without any interest. So we definitely are the biggest FDI in India, and we hope these FDIs in the future change the face in better investments in India.
Thank you. Well, I can take one more question, if there is a compelling one. No?
So,
Yes, go ahead. Briefly, please, briefly.
it would be a brief one. I'm Sreenivasan from Simbazi School of Banking and Finance. I have a question for Mr. Saeed Naqvi. As a journalist, what are the what are the difficulties that you face from your experiences regarding getting intel information during the tough times that we had between Iraq and India, to like the BBC example that you gave? So what are the difficulties they faced, and what are your experiences on that? Thank you.
There is no institutionalized coverage of foreign affairs in India. That's the basic thing you must realize. We have continued with the old colonial arrangements, namely BBC and CNN. We are passive recipients of images, information doled to us from them. There was a madman, yours truly, who argued with everybody in my system that, look, it is very important that we must see the world with our own eyes. BBC and CNN are my colleagues. I respect them, but they have their own perspective. We must look at the world. So I persuaded some people, and at very low budgets. And I must say, I owe a great deal to my friends in the Foreign Office. They were my friends. Zalmis, all the gentlemen sitting here. And I would ask them, I had no bureaus anywhere. I had some journals. I had worked in England and I'd worked in the United States. So I had some connections, some journalistic connections. Them, my diplomatic connections, and they were extremely helpful because we all work on the basic assumption that we may have, you and I may have differences of opinion on, say, the government in New Delhi, but when we are outside the country, we are batting more or less on the same side. You see, so therefore cooperation was very easy. And so when I went to Iran, I had the cooperation from the Iranian embassy in Delhi, and my ambassador in Iran was most cooperative. And then there's a huge, in Iran, for instance, there's a very sizable Sikh community. So whenever you got homesick, you went to, there were 3 big gurdwaras. I mean, people think that's a very restrictive regime and so on. There were 3 lively, thriving gurdwaras in Tehran. So you could go there. And if you required a drink or two in the evening, those people were helpful, as were your ambassadors under the table, as they say. And, well, that is true even in Riyadh, for heaven's sake, come on. So that is how one worked. It was your personal interest. It was a mission with me personally, that we must set this up. I have not succeeded, but in the course of doing it, I have ended up traveling to about 110 countries reporting. But one swallow doesn't a summer make. So that is it. I have done my lonesome bit. There is no institutional coverage of foreign affairs. What you see and what you read is what you get from Reuters, from BBC, from CNN. Tom Friedman. You know, the funny thing in your newspapers is that there is no regular columnist on any newspaper stuff. But each newspaper will take Tom Friedman, Maureen Dowd. It's amazing. In fact, I have lived through the ignominy when my resident editor in Delhi was very proud in the Statesman, was extremely proud of being the stringer for the Times of London. So that is the picture. I've answered you in great elaboration. I hope you have an idea.
Thank you very much, Saeed. Well, the next item on the agenda is the concluding remarks by the moderator. And I'm very tempted to use the next 30 minutes for that. But I know you will not like me for it. But one thing I must say, I must compliment Ambassador Devre and Dr. Vidya for putting together a fascinating panel and a balanced one. Can you imagine 2 serving ambassadors from Iran and Iraq, 2 former ambassadors from India, and an eternal ambassador for all countries, Saeed Naqvi. Well, Ambassador Prakash Shah would have been a perfect chair for this, but unfortunately you have been deprived of that pleasure, and the pleasure was entirely mine. Thank you very much indeed.
Just before the felicitations begin, a small piece of information. This year in August 2015, the Symbiosis International University and the Asia Europe Foundation, that is ASEF, came together to organize the 19th ASEF Summer University with focus on sustainable urbanization in heritage cities. The Symbiosis School of International Studies led a group of 7 students for a case study titled Linking Local Economies, Livelihoods and Lifestyles with Heritage at the Core. The group worked extensively for 7 days with the coppersmiths of Tambatali in Pune to find ways and means of reviving their dying craft. In this process, they also interviewed representatives from Copper, a social initiative by Ms. Rashmi Ranade, whose organization is dedicated to providing the coppersmiths a platform to showcase and preserve their art form. Taking from the recommendations of this study and marrying it with Symbiosis International University's social initiatives like the Center for Yoga, as well as our very own institutional social responsibilities, The occasion of the International Relations Conference 2015 provides a perfect platform for us to turn our words into actions and help promote the dying art form of coppersmithing. So all the mementos which have been given to the speakers are copper mementos and form a part of the corporate social responsibility of the university. So without much ado, I request Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan to kindly felicitate the speakers for this track. His Excellency, Ambassador Gholamreza Ansari. His Excellency, Ambassador Ahmad Tahsin Ahmad Berwari. Mr. Saeed Naqvi. Ambassador R. Dayakara. And Ambassador Dinkar Srivastava. May I request Dr. Vidya Yaravdekar ma'am, Principal Director Symbiosis, to kindly felicitate the chair for the track. Thank you, ma'am. We have a short coffee break now, so I request all of y'all, it's a very short 15-minute break, so be back on time. Thanks.